Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to totally flip the script on how we read the Bible. Instead of just seeing it as this static collection of ancient history, we're going to trace a massive, flowing biological metaphor from Genesis all the way to Revelation. It's all about one core concept: knowledge. But look, we aren't talking about everyday information or memorizing facts for a test. We're exploring the idea that knowledge is actually biological. We're asking whether the knowledge we hold acts as the living DNA of truth or the DNA of non-truth, actively flowing right through our spiritual veins. So think about it. What kind of knowledge blood is actually flowing in your head right now? When you read the scriptures, are you trapped in a historical record of the visible external world? Are you just seeing a list of physical events, rigid laws, and moral codes? Or do you see a medical blueprint for an internal, invisible reality? It's a huge shift. This framework really challenges us to ask if our biblical understanding is just surface-level data, or if it's a deep, living reality that circulates inside us like DNA, completely changing who we are from the inside out. Here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. We're going to look at the two kinds of knowledge, dive into yada, which is this amazing inner awakening, explore spiritual adultery, the Spirit's work, a crazy cool spiritual growth roadmap, and finally, what it means to have the blood of the living. Let's get right into it. Starting with section 1. Two kinds of knowledge. Right off the bat, we're looking at a massive divide in how we approach reality. On one side, you have knowledge that is strictly bound to the external world. This is your carnal, literal reading of the text. It's all about outward appearances, historical trivia, and keeping physical rules. But on the other side, we have spiritual knowledge. This is revealed truth that speaks exclusively to our internal, invisible world. And the absolute most incredible thing here is that God isn't checking our religious attendance record or weighing our outward performances. He's looking at our internal motives. He's looking at the exact type of knowledge that is constructing our inner temple. Which brings us perfectly to section 2, yada, and the idea of inner awakening.
Let's go right to the very beginning. Genesis 4, verse 1 says, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived." Notice that word knew. In our modern minds, we tend to think of knowledge as just downloading data into a mental filing cabinet. But the Bible introduces knowledge as a biological, creative union. Adam didn't just have data about Eve's existence. He knew her, and that knowing produced conception. It resulted in life. This right here is the master key to unlocking the entire biblical concept of knowledge. It proves that just gathering external biblical information births dead religion. But true spiritual knowledge is an act of deep conception that produces actual spiritual life.
And this is all tied to the profound Hebrew word yada. To yada someone or something means to know them experientially, to realize them intimately, and to actually become internally one with them. It is light years beyond just collecting facts or nodding along to a theological concept. True biblical knowledge, whether you call it yada or da'at, is an intimate, internal union with God's truth. It's a total awakening. When you yada the truth, it literally fuses with your spiritual cells. It becomes part of your very makeup. So, you know that famous verse, Hosea 4:6, the one where God says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge"? Well, when you understand yada, that verse takes on a devastating new weight. The prophets weren't crying because the Israelites lost their historical scrolls or forgot how to do a physical ritual. No, they were completely stuck in the visible external world. The prophets were grieving the total absence of this deep, inner, experiential DNA of truth. Without that internal, living connection, the people were literally spiritually dying, even if they looked perfectly religious on the outside. This framework actually totally redefines the Hebrew word for creation, bara. In this context, bara isn't just some magical act of popping physical matter out of thin air. The linguistic root actually implies cutting down forests, carving out, or clearing a space. It represents God's spirit actively cutting away our false DNA, our literalistic, surface-level readings and all those worldly illusions, so he can build and organize a pristine, new inner temple of truth right inside of us. But how did we get this false DNA in the first place? That brings us to section 3, spiritual adultery. In the context of our sources, spiritual adultery isn't just a physical or ethical failure. It is fundamentally ideological. Think about Genesis 3 for a second. When Eve looked at the tree, the text specifically notes she saw it was good for food and a delight to the eyes. The eyes. This is the ultimate pursuit of the visible external world. By accepting the serpent's ideology, which was based purely on external assessment and literal outcomes, she completely rejected God's invisible truth. That act of spiritual adultery was the literal original injection of the DNA of non-truth into the human bloodstream. It all comes down to which seed of knowledge you allow to take root in your mind.
And the New Testament tracks this biological tragedy perfectly. James 1:15 outlines an undeniable gestation process. Desire conceives, gives birth to sin, and sin brings forth death. Look at that biological language. When we hold the wrong worldview, when we desperately cling to external literalism and visible world desires, it acts like a rogue seed. It gestates inside us, and inevitably, for sure, it biologically births spiritual death. We are quite literally what we spiritually conceive.
All right, so how do we cure this terminal condition? Let's check out section 4, focusing on the Spirit's work. Jesus completely nails this head on in John 6:63. He says, "It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life." This sharp contrast between flesh and spirit perfectly mirrors our whole theme of the visible, literal text versus the invisible inner truth. The absolutely crucial point here is that the true work of the Spirit is delivering the Rhema, the unlocked, spoken, living essence of the Word, directly into our inner being. That Rhema is what replaces the dead DNA of the flesh. We see this spiritual battle playing out constantly in the Gospels. The Holy Spirit, or pneuma hagion, unlocks this inner truth and brings freedom. But then, on the flip side, we have the unclean spirit, pneuma akatharton. And according to this framework, an unclean spirit isn't some spooky Hollywood ghost. It represents a mind trapped in a literal text, totally blinded by worldly ideologies. Think about when Jesus heals the blind or the deaf. He wasn't just doing physical magic tricks. He was offering a profound metaphor for opening our eyes and ears to the invisible inner reality, literally curing the spiritual blindness and deafness caused by religious literalism. Once the Spirit starts this healing work, how do we actually grow? Section 5 reveals a fascinating linguistic roadmap. This is absolutely fascinating. The Greek prepositions used in the New Testament actually map out a believer's organic, biological evolution. We start at pros, which is merely facing Christ, kind of like standing across the room and acknowledging the truth. Then we move eis, stepping into Him. Next is en, living and breathing perfectly inside that reality. Then epi, standing firmly upon His truth as our foundation. After that, ek, where His nature actually begins sprouting out of us. And finally, apo, being sent out entirely separated from the old world. This isn't just learning some new facts, it is a complete structural evolution of our spiritual DNA from the outside in. The ultimate endgame of this roadmap is epignosis, which means complete, precise, connected knowledge. Imagine you have 1,000 scattered puzzle pieces of biblical verses just lying on a table. That's partial knowledge, fragmented knowledge of the literal text. Epignosis happens when the Spirit turns those fragments into living DNA, and all those puzzle pieces perfectly connect into one organic, living truth right inside you. You no longer have scattered religious facts. You have an unbroken, perfect connection to the Father. And that brings us to our final, most powerful section, the blood of the living. In Matthew 22, Jesus is debating the Sadducees. And why them? Because they were a sect entirely trapped in the literal text, completely denying the invisible reality of the resurrection. He boldly tells them, He is not God of the dead, but of the living. You see, in God's eyes, figures like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob aren't dusty historical relics from the past. They represent an unbroken flow of the inner DNA of truth across generations. Because they possess this divine knowledge, they are in an eternal, present state of living. This deeply, deeply expands how we understand the very core of Jesus' message in John 6 about communion. Sarx, or flesh, represents absorbing the external gospel news. You have to start there. But haima, the blood, represents the circulating DNA of truth. Blood touches every single living cell in a body. Consuming Christ's blood actually means internalizing His invisible knowledge so deeply that it completely replaces that non-truth DNA we inherited all the way back from Eve. It circulates perfectly within us, connecting every spiritual cell. When this incredible truth begins to circulate, it acts as the ultimate spiritual medicine. Think of it like a powerful antibiotic dissolving into your bloodstream to hunt down an infection. This DNA of truth relentlessly purges the false knowledge of the visible world right out of our minds. It flushes out the literalism, it flushes out the carnal desires, and as it transforms us, it stands as the ultimate proof, the spiritual paternity test, really, that we are true children of God, finally stepping into the eternal rest of His presence. We've covered some serious ground in this explainer today. We've seen how the Bible, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, isn't a history book of the outside world, but a profound, flowing medical blueprint for our inner world. It leaves us with one deeply personal, super provocative question to reflect on. When you read the Word, when you learn, and as you live your everyday life, is the DNA of truth or the DNA of non-truth flowing inside you? Take a moment to really examine your own spiritual bloodstream today. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep seeking that inner truth.